Hey everyone, my name is Penny Zenker, and it's time to reset. This podcast goes beyond just navigating change. It's about new ways of thinking about how you can approach challenges, how you can shift your mindset when needed, create some space and grace for yourself so that you can rethink, recharge, and reprioritize when and where needed. Are you ready to unlock your full potential? Thank you for hitting play and sharing this next episode with me. It's time to reset. Hello and welcome to Take Back Time. My name is Penny Zenker and I'm your host. And I'm excited today to talk about big thinking and exponential theory because, really when we think bigger, we approach things differently. And the small stuff kind of falls away because you get more focused and clear on what's going to get you to a bigger place. And we're going to talk all about that with Aaron Bear. His life's purpose is to create a 1 million exponential leaders. I love that, right? That there is a big goal behind that. And I'm curious to see how many you're at right now, Aaron. But let me finish your bio here. He is the Wall Street Journal and the USA Today best-selling author of Exponential Theory and the creator of the XMBA, that's Exponential Mindsets, Beliefs, and Attitudes group coaching program. And he's got the XX podcast, 2 exponentials in a flat world. He's been traveling around 90 countries, all 50 states. He's facilitated innovation strategy workshops and talks in over 500 companies, appeared on 20 of the top 250 podcasts, and on and on and on. I could go on and on because this list just keeps going on. But at the end of the day, we want to hear from Aaron. So Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Penny. Thanks for having me.
So, when did you become a big thinker?
Yeah, big thinking is a process. And I've actually created a coaching program around that where you kind of unpeel a lot of your people, get stuck in a rut, I guess you could say, or stuck in small thinking because of stuff that holds them back from the past or, which I equate to creating limitations or regrets, a lot of trauma people are dealing with, or stuff in the future that they have anxiety or worries or fear or doubt or stress about something in the future that hasn't happened. So they're just not being mindful in the moment.
I don't think there's anybody on this podcast that has ever felt like that. So you mean people are human?
People are human. And once you strip away some of those things that are holding you back, those limiting thoughts, and you actually just give yourself the freedom to kind of think bigger, you all of a sudden, some of these small things that used to be so consuming kind of fade away because you realize when I have a goal, like example, Penny, you started this podcast off with my 1 million exponential leaders. It doesn't allow me to have time to worry about what I have for dinner or what I wear or any kind of anxiety or stress over like the things that I think burden, a lot of people every day. I don't worry about that stuff anymore because it's not really going to help me get to my purpose. And if I'm impacting what I'm doing by talking to you and, getting to a new audience, and if we impact one person on this that watches your podcast just to think a little bit bigger about their lives, then we've expanded the universe in our own way. And that's what I want to do every day for the rest of my life. And that's my life's purpose.
That's awesome. So is this kind of related to, I don't remember who said it, but, don't sweat the small stuff and it's all small stuff? Like I don't remember who said that quote, but is that kind of your philosophy in life?
I'll give you a couple of stories from the book, and I'll start off with Elon Musk, which is probably one of our biggest thinkers. He has a chapter and several different reference points, but I have this story around Mars shots. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of moon shots. Mm-hmm. Like Google has moon shots, like, hey, let's shoot for the moon. Mm-hmm. Well, Elon Musk simply just said, I'm not going to shoot for the moon. I'm going to shoot for Mars, and I'm going to create a goal 25. When he did this, he said, I'm going to create a goal of going to Mars and civilizing it and put 40,000 people on it by the year 2041. That long-term thinking is exponential thinking, meaning nothing. Bill Gates has a really good quote about this that, a lot of people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but underestimate what they can do in 10. And very few people, and this is what I would say is, think 10 years out or 15 or 20. And especially with the world being all consuming social media, bringing you further and further into anxiety and stress over what's happening now, releasing yourself from some of that. And that's what our group coaching program is really about is, releasing yourself from the things of the future that are going to happen. The only way they happen is what you do now. But what Elon Musk did so in particular in this story about Mars shots is he literally went beyond the moon and just said, we're going to go to Mars. And regardless, if you look at his company, his space company, SpaceX, you look at his goals, they've already further achieved any goal than any other privatized space company in the world. And even if he fails at the point, never goes to Mars, his goals were so big. And what it did is it attracted all these other big thinkers. They're like, well, I want to be on that rocket ship going to Mars. I want to help that because that's bigger than anything I could think I could be part of. And that's the same thing I'm doing by saying I'm going to bring 1 million exponential leaders into this world through this program, is just to think big. And if I do not succeed, I will fail. I will not fail. I will either win or I'll learn. And that's kind of part of our process is, the only way you fail is if you actually just say you fail. But if you learn from it, eventually you will learn from that. And that's where you actually can move yourself forward. And that's where you can release some of these self-limiting beliefs that people have to think bigger. And then a lot of this other small stuff really just does become meaningless and not really that important to your day-to-day.
I mean, not everybody succeeds. I think the greatest moves forward are when we don't succeed and succeed and succeed. It's when we fail and we learn. And, I don't believe in failure either. It's kind of failure is just feedback, right? Is an opportunity to learn so that we can get it right or get it better. I think that you'll see that from big thinkers, right? It's because you have to think like that. Otherwise, you would just curl up into a ball every time that it didn't work out the way that you wanted to. And you just get to say, okay, well, we know more now. And can we step back and look at things in a different way? So I'm a total believer because I do an exercise in some of the keynotes and workshops that I do that help people to see that when you do think bigger or give yourself like a really crazy constraint, it gets you out of your everyday thinking. Like we think like this. And the only way that we're going to break out of that and break out of even small increments progression, which is nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to think big and you want to make exponential growth, then you've got to ditch your current thinking. And so having a super big goal or even a really tight constraint, like, we're going to cut costs by half. One of those is going to force you out of your normal way of thinking. And I've seen it every time. I love when I do this exercise because everybody's like, oh, this is impossible, right? Until they get out of their old way of thinking. So I'm a big fan.
Everything seems impossible until, saying you're going to go to Mars sounds crazy. And that's where if you look at a lot of these companies that have created exponential growth, their idea or their premise wasn't necessarily rational. And that was the point that eventually you start to see. I mean, it's just like every invention that surrounds us all day long. Just the fact that we're talking through a video right now, 30 years ago, they'd have thought this was, Jetson, George Jetson kind of stuff. But, the world kind of progresses at the pace that we're ready to accept that change. And that's where you see these leaders that are at most exponential pushing those boundaries and really helping us kind of see new potential of what it could be. Because I think before Elon Musk said we could go to Mars, that was like a hypothetical. Now it's like a company mission. And you're like, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, now there's people starting to believe that. There's just a few, just like they did with Tesla. There was a lot of naysayers for a long, long time. I had a Tesla back in 2013, and only thing I wish I would have done is invested in the stock instead of the car. And literally that stock, the price of the car that I paid for it, if I would have invested in stock, would have been worth, I think it was like $3.2 million or something crazy. So, hindsight's 2020. That's why exponential thinkers just move forward. So,
right. Absolutely. So what's an exercise or a simple way to get people to appreciate and get into that thinking? You said you teach people that and you've got a course on that, right? Because it's something that we can learn. So what's a tip to help somebody to get into that mindset or get into that thinking process?
Well, one of the pre-workings that I do in my workshops, and this is just, it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of work and a reflection is, by the way, I love constraints too. And just making people say, well, what if you had to spend $100 million? Or what if you had to spend, you only had, in companies that have a lot of money, what if you only had $500 to spend on this? And it does just challenge you to get outside the mind thinking. And so part of that is my pre-working is to develop out what I ask people to do before they come is sit down and write out every thought on your mind. And when you do that and you get exhausted, the first time I ever did this exercise, I wrote 334 things. And they were as simple as like, I need to buy toothpaste. I want to take a trip to Australia. And what's interesting is this was literally uncovering my conscious mind, but also starting to get into my subconscious mind of things that I didn't even know were there. Once you empty your conscious mind out, I was able to get kind of below that and kind of experience it. But the idea of doing that in the pre-work is that when you show up to my workshop is that we would then start taking them as how many of those are aligned with your big purpose? And do you have a big purpose? And then we would say, how many of them are important that you do in the next 6 weeks? And then you go through all those. And then everything else would go on an everything list that you're not doing now. Like you just literally set that aside. What's interesting is the subconscious now has registered all those. And if you've written down those or looked at those a few times, you actually start checking off these things on the everything list. Like my 334 things is like down to 17 from when I first did this like 10 years ago. So that continues to get refined. I continue to add things to it. But the original list, it's funny when I go and reflect on it. But what then I ask people to do is look in the next 6 weeks, because really like what you do now is, and this is helping people to be mindful in their time, is start to schedule in the things. And I think habits, I actually think goals are great, but I think habits are the only way to reach goals. So what are the habits it's going to take in the next 6 weeks to focus you more and more on your purpose? And even if you don't know your purpose, what are the things that you know that you want to move in the direction in your life? It's like, hey, I want a new job, or, I want to save for this car. Like I want to do this side hustle, whatever it is in your life. I literally have them write it down, and then I say, schedule in the habits so that they become a reminder. And you will fail at this. Again, this is back to that failure conversation.
Right.
Like literally, in our company, we say we don't use the word fail. It's a way to explain it. But what did you learn when you didn't do it? And why didn't you do it? And then now, how do we do it? Eventually, you'll win. Like if you're just persistent and consistent. And that's where I think exponential thinkers, even with a very big idea, eventually they start winning. And there's doubts and fears along the way. And you kind of can even see it in Elon Musk. And literally 3 years ago, he was ready to sell Tesla. Now it's, the most valuable car company in the world. So, in my book, I have lots of these stories about even Google wanted to sell $1 million to Excite when they were very young. They were like, well, we don't really have a business model and we want to just do cool stuff. So now they're doing cool stuff on exponential level, but it's because they really stayed with it. All those things. But that exercise really is a great way, a gateway into this is to start thinking is how do you spend your time? What are your habits? Are they exponential? Are you actually thinking long-term? Because are these goals, have you really thought, and I even think Elon Musk, this goal of 25 years out is why he's able to actually get other big thinkers to like, okay, I want to be part of that mission because it's much bigger than they can think.
Absolutely. It attracts people who think like that. It inspires people who want to think like that. And it brings people collaboratively together, right? I mean, we saw it when that big put a man on the moon, when that was sort of a crazy idea, right? And so those crazy ideas are what bring people together. Like you said, Apple, Steve Jobs, had that vision and brought people together to do amazing things with technology there. I want to come back to a couple of points. You said about scheduling your habits, right? And making sure that you're making time for those habits that bring you to the goals that you want. And you said that we try and sometimes we don't hit the mark. And I wanted to bring up like what I've seen, and maybe, I don't know if this is what you've seen and what you mean by that, but we get caught up in this all or nothing thinking that you may have made a complete step forward. Like I was working with somebody and she wanted to spend time writing her book. And so she set some time for those important habits, right? To start writing and to be writing 3 times a week in the morning. And she's got 2 kids and life is busy. And she comes to the next meeting and she's like, I failed. And I said, well, hold on a second. How many times did you write? And she said once. And her goal was 3. And I said, well, how many did you write the week before you set that goal? 0. Well, hey, all or nothing thinking, she wrote 1 more time than she wrote the time before. So we have to be careful that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater type of thing, that we recognize when we are making progress, even if it's not like there's some acclimation period in bringing those habits to, if you want to call it, more into our identity, more into consistency. Yep. So do you see that too? Sort of this all or nothing thinking that gets people stuck and pushes them back to where they were?
Yeah. And I think it's short-term thinking, right? It's like, hey, I didn't in this period of time, but if she's able to write once a week for 52 weeks in a row and change that habit, then it's easier to do too. So to your point, she had success. It's just how you frame it in your mind. It's like, okay, I'm doing more. How do I actually this habit, and what did I learn about the times that I didn't do it? And that really goes that there is no fit. I think you and I both have said this now. that if we actually let failure say that we fail, then you do fail. But in my mind, in an exponential thinker's mind, it sounds like in your mind, is what we learn from that. And eventually we will win. And I think that's part of, Malcolm Gladwell wrote about the 10,000 hours. And then actually Michael Simmons, who is a mental model production guy, wrote about the 10,000 experiments. And I really feel it is, what we've gotten to in the book. I talk about Amazon and Facebook and some of these large companies, how much they experiment with their technologies that they can move just faster than the rest of the world. That's a big part of people's growth, is just experimenting. So the fact that you may be successful and write one more time a week, that's a success. To your point, is like, how do we build on that? Because everything takes momentum. And if you've ever looked at any exponential curve, it never goes straight up. It is a hockey stick. And there is quite a while that you have to build the habit and build the muscle before you actually have those breakthroughs. And that's part of that. Not necessarily why I don't think it takes 10,000 hours anymore, because we have such an ability to become an expert in a subject in a short amount of time, because we have so much information at our fingertips. And I think back, 30, 50 years ago, you had to go to a library and it took, a lifetime to become an expert. Now it's just experiment fast and hard. And that's, to your point, is if she wants to write a book, which, I went through that experience and I know exactly how excruciatingly painful writing a book can be, especially in the beginning when you're, just gathering your thoughts and everything before it can kind of come home to a cohesive thought. The fact that she wrote once is something to build on, and that's a success. And that's where, to your point, is oftentimes is the duration of that, because it may take a longer period of time. You have unrealistic expectations of what you can do in a short amount of time. That's where I literally have a whole chapter about the long game, is really how do you think a little bit longer term? Because writing a book is not a short-term venture. There's a lot of things online that says, hey, sign up for my program and write a book in 1 week. Well, everybody wishes that. It's not going to be a bestseller. There's no bestseller out there that's written in 1 week. There's nothing comes fast and easy.
Oh my God. It must have been, with my book, I must have had 100 revisions. I mean, it requires that.
It does. That's where I think when you are successful, it's because you had a longer term, and you stuck with it. And the fact is that you kept learning, like, why didn't I do it at this time? If I blocked the time for this, why? Okay, maybe the timing was off because of my kids or whatever, like you said. So, you and I agree on a lot right here. So this is good.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I was excited to have you on, because, it's always, I get to one really big thing, right, that I've accomplished. And then it's like, well, geez, I don't know what the next big thing is. So how do you think bigger? And, and that's kind of a question that I always ask myself is, okay, think bigger, right? I'm just getting to a goal. And I want to ask you where you are in your million leaders, but I'm close to 1 million people having watched my TEDx, for instance. And I have on vision board that I wrote that I want to impact 1 million people. And I realized, right, it's not just the TEDx, right? There's people who have bought my books. There's people who have been in my events. I was part of a movie project that I put out there as, okay, let's go bigger. And I want to be, and I became an executive producer on a movie called Wishman that was about Frank Shankowitz. And he was one of the founders of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Okay. But it's like, you attract these things when you set those big goals. So where are you now with your million, and what is your next, sometimes big thinkers don't just have one big thing, right? You already know what that next big thing is. So
you got a few questions in there, but I think part of it is I just recently set this million exponential leaders, which is a different kind of leader. So I'm really on the beginning of that curve. I'm literally just saying, I finished this book, Exponential Theory, and it landed me at a place that this is the gateway to my XMBA, which is the Exponential Mindset, Beliefs, and Attitudes. I'm watching a podcast, really about exponential thinkers in a flat world. Everyone, right now, I go in and out of, I work with Daimler, Mercedes-Benz, Coca-Cola, Belfius Bank, some big companies. At the very top, they still are very flat thinkers. They're thinking about, 5%, 10% gains, and that is not what the problem with that in big companies is. There's all these other companies that are growing at exponential rates. Well, simple math would tell you that these exponential companies eventually take over all these big companies. And in every industry, we're starting to see that, where the new industries are dying overnight because there's new and better solutions, but you're seeing the exponential growth kind of overshadow that. So in my own goals, I helped Oxford Leadership, they have an online coaching certification program, which they're still enrolling. They're about to reach 1 million people in their program. I was part of creating that online program. So that gave me an inspiration to say, hey, I want to do that for myself for Exponential. I've coached and facilitated in over 500 organizations. So I've been busy traveling the world. I've been, like you mentioned, I've been in 90 countries. So I've touched a lot of people and facilitated a lot of conversations around this. So my 10,000 experiments, I'm ready to give back and really get on that exponential curve. I just recently formed that, 1 million exponential leaders because of what I'm doing now. And I'm literally starting over, where I even created a startup school in Arizona State University, that the goal was to reach 1 million people, through library systems, where we literally gave away an online entrepreneurial curriculum to libraries across the world. Mm-hmm. And that basically is scaling on its own. So I've been a part of like this goal of 1 million. True exponential thinking, or, and I was entrepreneur in residence at Singularity, is how do you impact 1 billion people? And that's where my goal of 1 million exponential leaders means that I'll far surpass impacting 1 billion people from those leaders leading in an exponential way. So it's really a compound goal on that. And it's just me to say, like, how can I do that? Like you reaching some of these goals, how do you create a goal so big for yourself that, it's like going to Mars. If Elon Musk goes to Mars, then he's got to create a bigger goal, right? Well, how do you do that for yourself? Because, and right now, 1 million exponential leaders, I see myself being on the board of several exponential companies as I'm part of that. I see my own world expanding just by my network and just hanging around these people that think big. And if that's what I do for the rest of my life, that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I can see that you're passionate about it, and we've given people something to think about here in terms of stepping back and looking how they can think bigger and get outside of, the box. I love how you talk about, the flat world, flat thinkers. That's a cool way to look at it. So what didn't I ask you that you really believe that the audience needs to hear?
I just think that, we go full circle to where we started is, a lot of people maybe out there feeling stuck that they are unable to think big. It takes time. You have to let go of some limiting beliefs, some trauma in the past, belief systems that honestly have been anchored in over history. And that's part of, I think, the conversation of creating constraints and different ways to think about that. When you actually really think about how you spend time and how you want to intentionally spend time, candidly, that's probably the biggest growth opportunity, is just to say, well, am I doing things that I actually want to do? Do I want, like my day is filled with things that I want to do. Like I couldn't be on doing anything else but talking to you right now. It's most valuable because I'm going to reach a new audience, your audience. They're going to learn about this. If we can impact one person that thinks bigger and becomes more productive just from the little tidbits we have here, that's amazing. And that's where I just need to do that over and over again. And then everything else I do kind of aligns with that. And that's where my true north, all these other little small things that I think people get caught in those limitations or those belief systems, those attitudes to say, well, in the words like, in my company, we have BCTs, buts, tries, and can'ts. We actually put money into a party fund if you use those words, and try. They're very powerless words, and they really are just, if I said, hey, it was really nice being on this podcast, but, I just said it, I really wasn't nice, so why are we using these languages? And when you say the word C word, the can't word, in fact, my kids, I have a daughter that's 13. I'm completely fine with them cussing. They don't, by the way, because
they can't say can.
Yeah, exactly. They know that those are bad words in my parenting. And it's kind of funny because they also understand when I said, if you use a cuss word, just make sure it's worthwhile. You don't want to use it. You don't want to use it as a regular word, but make sure it makes an impact if you're going to use it.
Right. Right. Well, that's great. And I think that shows, you walk the talk, and it's not just in one area of your life, right? Strategies are cross-contextual. We can have exponentially more love in our life, right? By what we decide to focus on and how we use our time. So I think exponential thinking goes across, every area that we live in. If we step back and think, how can I get more of this by doing I like using the constraint. So if I only had X amount of time to spend with my family, for instance, what would I do to make that connection as deep as possible? What would I do to make a difference in that? So yeah, and I do like using constraints as much as I like saying, think bigger. What else could you accomplish? I think both of them get us to think outside the box.
Yeah, a lot of my thinking comes really back to, as you think bigger and part of it, and you look at your time is, a lot of people, and this goes to my daughter, it goes to all of us, as we spend a lot more time on social media. in compare culture, cancel culture. There's just a lot of negativity out there. There's some social media, if used the right way, is very, very positive and can be really, really good for someone. It's just if people are consumed by it and live by it, then they're either living in the future they don't have because they're comparing themselves to something, or in the past of things that have held them back. And that's where when you start to look at your habits, and that first exercise I have is a telling one, because it'll start to like, how do I reprogram myself? How do I actually, unlearn? And I think a key point that we have in our program is self-help sucks, because self-help says there's something wrong with you. The fact is we're all perfect just the way we are. In fact, we've chosen to be just the way we are. We brought all of our life's decisions have made us right in the place that we are. It's just maybe now it's time to think about what are the programs that we need to unlearn that don't serve us well. And that's part of looking at the habits of what people do in their past, what led to that trauma, or what led to that belief system, so that you can unlearn that, so that you can break free, because that is kind of the first part of creating an exponential mindset. The reality is big thinkers don't have those limitations. I actually used to, before Donald Trump was president, before it was politically, there is a political spectrum of using them, I used to always use them. And the one thing that you can say about Donald Trump is he thinks big. And that has helped him and served him well, not thinking small, whether you like him or not. It's like, it's something to think about, like, okay, this guy thought so big that he kind of surprised himself. I think surprised the world becoming president. But I don't attempt to use them too much anymore because it's so polarizing. But the reality of it is there's something to learn from everyone. And that's where sometimes we can unlearn by we see behaviors that we don't like. We can learn that that's something we need to unlearn about ourselves. And I think that's part of, letting go of things. At the end of the day, you shouldn't have any regrets or limits. We're all human. We've all made mistakes. We all have trauma. It just depends on how much do we want to carry that trauma around to hold us. So my conversations ultimately, when we talk about exponential, come all the way back to mental health, which, come back to my daughter who's 13 and, her comparing herself or, canceling someone else or being bullied online or whatever. Like, it's like all of a sudden when you start thinking bigger, that becomes less of something that she consumes. And honestly, it deflects off of her because she's thinking bigger. And with that, I'm proud to say she won top elf on Nickelodeon because she thinks big, and she, out of like 7,000 or 8,000 kids, she was able to kind of be this kid that rose up to the top and, through a few different kind of online reality, was able to be the nicest kid on Santa's list to win top elf. And
that's awesome.
That's something as a parent I'm most proud of. And, but it is her exponential thinking. It's her way of just, like, hey, I'm not going to let these little things bother me. I'm just going to overcome them because there's bigger challenges for me than this.
Absolutely. So, well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. And, we're going to have all your links in the show notes, but go ahead and tell us where people can reach you and find out more about this course so they can be one of those exponential leaders that you're influencing.
Yeah, you can find out more information at exponentialtheory.com or aaronbare.com, AARONBARE.com. Reload's a kind of a landing page that'll learn a little bit more. We even offer some free different chapters and free ebook and different things. So lots to learn about exponential, thinking and exponential theory. The idea is that eventually when you think so big, you become more conscious and we'll start solving some of these global problems. That's really how the book ends, is you start to realize when you think big, no problem becomes overcoming. Right now, some problems seem unsurmountable, but now if we put enough brain power into it, we're going to be able to overcome some of these big, big things, hurdles that we think are so big, the climate issues, like social justice. I really talk about a lot of those issues, is that when you start thinking bigger, is like, there is ways to overcome such insurmountable in people's minds. And that's where, if we're not thinking about now, if we're in the moment now, creating like bigger thinking, we'll get there much faster.
Awesome. Totally agree. Thanks for being here, Aaron.
Thanks, Penny. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for being here, because really this show is about take back time. How do you take back time? Well, you take back time by thinking bigger, thinking and creating that exponential growth, because that means you're investing your time in something that's going to grow you further, faster. And this way of thinking is absolutely essential in every area of your life. So if you want to take back time, you want to really step back and see how you can think in this way, thinking bigger and exponential, understand exponential theory and how that can support you. So thank you for being here. My name is Penny Zenker, and this is Take Back Time. We'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thank you for spending this time with me. It really means a lot. If you're feeling a little off, distracted, overwhelmed, stuck, or just out of sync, remember that's your signal to reset. And that's all it takes, just recognizing one reset moment at a time. So stay tuned for more tips, tools, tricks, stories, strategies, all here on Time to Reset. We'll see you in the next episode.